In today's video, we're going to see how Grid Legends plays on Mac. Let's do it. First, let's go over the Mac technology of this port. Grid Legends has been ported over to Mac by Feral Interactive. Feral are known to utilize the latest Mac gaming tech, and as you'd expect, they told me the game runs on Metal 3. As most of us know, Grid Legends was announced for Mac ages ago, back in June 2022 at WWDC. Why the delay? I don't know, only Feral knows that. But they've ported a full DirectX 12 game to Metal 3, and I'm sure that was a fairly big task. Although at the end of the day, development takes time in general, and it's best to have a working game than a completely broken one. Fort Zolus. This is Feral's first game to support metal effects on Mac. It works a little differently to other macOS games using this tech though. Instead of strictly using metal effects temporal upscaling, Feral have gone with TAA plus spatial upscaling. I generally dislike spatial upscaling within metal effects, but due to Feral using both TAA and metal effects spatial, the image quality isn't nearly as bad compared to other recent AAA Mac ports. Metal effects spatial looks absolutely disgusting in Resident Evil Village and No Man's Sky, for example. You have access to different quality levels too, and new is the automatic mode. Automatic will dynamically adjust the resolution with metal effects for either 30 or 60 FPS. This is Feral's second game to support HDR as well, with their first being Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Strangely, I noticed a number of my Macs could not enable HDR on their displays. You can see these machines on screen now. All these machines support HDR in other macOS games that support this tech, so I don't know why it's not working here. Let me know in the comments if you're having issues on your Mac. While these machines that I have could enable HDR on their native displays. Obviously, Grid Legends has full controller support on Mac. It would be stupid if it didn't. My only disappointment is that there are no next-gen controller features, like on DualSense controllers that can have advanced haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. Feral told me we support the controller with standard haptics, but not the advanced features. I really do hope in the future Feral can support the advanced features. To my knowledge, there really isn't a single game on Mac that has those advanced features yet. I may be wrong. Like most of Feral Interactive's racing games on Mac, all the way back to their PowerPC ports in the early 2000s, Grid Legends has full racing wheel support on Apple Silicon Macs. Here I am playing with a Logitech G920 and driving force shifter. It works great, and I really enjoy the real-life force feedback in this game. And I didn't need to download any drivers as well, it just worked straight away. I know it's corny to say, but it makes the game so much more immersive, especially driving manual. It's been such a long time since I've played a racer on Mac with my G920, not since Dirt 4 or Dirt Rally, quite a few years back, so my device is quite dirty after not being used for a few years. You can obviously edit the device, changing input bindings, advanced input, and vibration and feedback. For me, I had to dramatically lower the brake saturation, so I didn't have to put my foot so hard down to the floor. But this is most likely an issue with my setup and not the game itself. Feral told me most standard USB wheels will work with Grid Legends. The wheels in the following list have been tested and are supported by the game. Now let's take a look at the game's performance across a number of different Apple Silicon Macs. For this test, I'm using the game's inbuilt benchmark tool. Up first is my MacBook Pro 13-inch with M1. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 36.5, a min FPS of 28.6, and a max FPS of 47.8. You know, I'm really happy with this, especially with the fact that it hardly ever goes below 30 FPS. 30 FPS is completely playable for a racing game, like this one in particular, in my opinion anyway, and it is what you'd see on the PS4 version. It's the type of AAA performance I would hope to see on M1 too, and this is without metal effects. I also tried the game at 1080p, medium preset. The average FPS jumped up to 46.1. Sadly, achieving 60 FPS at 1080p isn't really possible at decent settings, but M1 Macs usually struggle to receive 60 FPS with big AAA games at 1080p anyway. So what if you want 60 FPS on this machine then? It's possible, but at 900p, VSync enabled, a 60 FPS cap, medium preset with metal effects unbalanced. With these settings, it sees an average FPS of 56.6, a min FPS of 45, and a max FPS of 58.8. Playing at 900p probably isn't ideal for 60 FPS though, but if you're playing on the MacBook's native display, it should be okay. Although here I'm on an external monitor and it's not amazing. You can see the low resolution. Metal Effects makes the image quality even lower as well, with worse image quality too, but it's the best I could do here. Up next is my MacBook Pro 13-inch with M2. At 1080p, high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 47.9, a min FPS of 34.6, and a max FPS of 62.4. It's a noticeable difference over my M1 MacBook Pro, with about plus 11 FPS. With many AAA games, there is often almost no difference between these two machines, so I'm happy to see these results. But what if you want 60 FPS on this machine? The extra performance means you can achieve 60 FPS at 1080p. Kinda. It's best to play at 1080p, VSync enabled, a 60 FPS cap, medium preset with metal effects unbalanced. It sees an average FPS of 59.3, a min FPS of 41.5, and a max FPS of 59.9. This isn't native 1080p, but I didn't mind the look of it, and if you're playing on the MacBook's native display, meh, you're not going to notice the lower quality or whatever. Moving on, we have my MacBook Air 15-inch, which also has M2. At 1080p, high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 40.8, a min FPS of 27.5, and a max FPS of 55.4. Some of you may be saying, wait, why is the average FPS -7 over your M2 MacBook Pro? It has the same M2 chip and even has more RAM, 16GB over 8GB. I'm going to put it down to the MacBook Air having no fan, unlike my MacBook Pro, and a much thinner design. Throttling will occur here. It's unavoidable, but it's still pretty good performance for a freaking MacBook Air. So what if you want 60 FPS on this machine? It's best to play at 1080p, VSync enabled, a 60 FPS cap, medium preset with metal effects unbalanced. This MacBook Air sees an average FPS of 55.7, a min FPS of 43.7, and a max FPS of 59. It's about -4 FPS from my M2 MacBook Pro. You definitely could play at lower settings. I just wanted to compare these two machines for you. Ferrell actually told me some time ago they often test Apple hardware under extreme conditions, such as going into one of their offices and putting on the heater to see when a device will start throttling. So what I'm trying to get at is don't be concerned if your MacBook Air gets hot. Ferrell will have you covered, and it's just what the device it does that. Just don't get stressed. Coming up next is my iMac 24-inch with M3. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 52.2, a min FPS of 40.5, and a max FPS of 68.1. It's not bad performance, I suppose, but for a dedicated all-in-one PC, I would have loved this iMac to see closer to 60 FPS at high settings. So in that case, what if you want 60 FPS on this iMac? I found to achieve this, play at 1080p and medium preset, but enable VSync and a 60 FPS cap and put metal effects to quality. Doing this sees an average FPS of 59.4, a min FPS of 54.3, and a max FPS of 59.9. 1080p and metal effects on quality is fine. You're not going to notice the lower internal resolution with metal effects unless you maybe look at the display with a magnifying glass. And trust me, playing at a mostly locked 60 FPS is much more ideal on this iMac's larger display. Now let's have a look at my MacBook Pro 14-inch with M1 Pro. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 62.7, a min FPS of 47.1, and a max FPS of 79.4. Pretty happy with these results. Again, it's the type of performance I'd like to see from M1 Pro. I'm pleased to see it doesn't go far below 60 FPS that often as well. These 14-inch models are notorious for throttling. I played the story mode for about 45 minutes on this Mac and did the benchmark maybe 5 times after that, and it never went below an average 62 FPS in the benchmark. The fan was loud, yes. The Mac was hot, yes, but it didn't seem to affect performance on my end. What if you want to play above 1080p, let's say 1440p, and ultra-high graphics? This is possible, but you'll need to enable VSync and a 30 FPS cap to achieve this. The game sees an average FPS of 29.9, a min FPS of 28.6, and a max FPS of 29.9. The game looks great at 1440p, but you'll have to accept 30 FPS. I've said it before, but 30 FPS is completely playable for this game, and it's a practically locked 32, so it plays great this way. If you want a higher FPS at 1440p, you'll need to play at high settings, enable VSync and a 60 FPS cap, and put metal effects to balanced. This provides an average FPS of 55.9. Keep in mind, this isn't native 1440p, so you may as well stay at 1080p. Now let's have a look at my Mac Mini with M2 Pro. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 84.0, a min FPS of 54.6, and a max FPS of 118.2. Mac Mini with M2 Pro is an underrated beast. This is definitely one of my favorite Apple Silicon Macs to recommend to Mac gamers. It hardly ever goes below 60 FPS in this benchmark mode, which is wonderful to see. I also tried the game at 1440p, ultra high preset with VSync enabled and a 60 FPS cap with metal effects on quality. Playing in this state provides an average FPS of 59.3, a min FPS of 54.4, and a max FPS of 58.9. This isn't native 1440p, but it's definitely not far off it. You're not going to notice the lower internal resolution with metal effects unless you look at the display with a magnifying glass maybe. It's just great playing the game above 1080p. I wanted to see if the game can pull off 4K at ultra high preset, and it can. To do this, you'll have to enable VSync and put the FPS to 30. This provides an average FPS of 29.9. It's an absolute treat playing Grid Legends at native 4K, and this is without Metal Effects 2. Yes, you'll have to accept 30 FPS, but I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, 30 FPS is completely playable for this game. It's time to have a look at my MacBook Pro 16-inch with M1 Max. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 94, a min FPS of 65.7, and a max FPS of 123. I would have really loved this game to get close to 100 FPS on average, but it's not too far off, I suppose. I also tried the game at 4K ultra high preset. Playing in this state provides an average FPS of 50.8, a min FPS of 42.3, and a max FPS of 57.6. Really not bad, in my opinion. I'm quite impressed that M1 Max is able to pull this off, actually. If you want closer to 60 FPS at 4K ultra high, it is possible thanks to Metal Effects Balanced. This provides an average FPS of 59.5. Might not be worth it though, as this is not true 4K. Metal Effects Balanced will lower the internal resolution quite a bit, and yeah, it might be noticeable to some. It's time to have a look at my MacBook Pro 16-inch with M2 Max. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 117, a min FPS of 73, and a max FPS of 154.8. Quite a big jump in performance over my M1 Max machine, with plus 23 FPS. Wow! One theory I have for this Mac performing so much better is because I've hardly used it, whereas my 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Max has been my daily machine since it came out in 2021. It might be getting quite tired. I also tried the game at 4K ultra high preset. Playing in this state provides an average FPS of 62, a min FPS of 52.5, and a max FPS of 71.9. Really good, I believe. I think it's pretty rad that I can play at native 4K, max graphics, with 60 FPS, and this is without Metal Effects. Very impressive in my books. It's also quite a big difference in performance over M1 Max, with plus 11 FPS. Now it's time to have a look at my MacBook Pro 14-inch with M3 Max. This machine throttles a bit. For example, when I first tried the benchmark mode at 1080p high preset, it saw an average FPS of 120, a min FPS of 80.6, and a max FPS of 168.5. I then played the story mode for about 30 minutes or so, came back and redid the benchmark, and the results were worse. An average FPS of 103.4, a min FPS of 72, and a max FPS of 158.9. I then tried the game at 4K ultra high preset. Playing in this state provided an average FPS of 51.6, a min FPS of 41.9, and a max FPS of 58.9. I then went and put the MacBook Pro under my aircon unit for a few minutes to cool it down. Reran the test, and the results improved quite a bit. Now the average FPS was 62.3, with a min FPS of 55.3 and a max FPS of 70.7. Our last Mac to look at is my Mac Studio with M1 Ultra. At 1080p high preset, the game sees an average FPS of 89, a min FPS of 58.7, and a max FPS of 116.6. I don't know why the average FPS is so low, especially when comparing 1080p high on my M2 Pro Mac Mini with only +5 FPS. Theoretically, it should be much higher, as it's a more powerful chip, and this device is amazing with thermal management. It doesn't really get hot. I did the benchmark over and over and over and over again, and it never went above 90 FPS at 1080p high. So I then tried the game at 4K ultra high preset. Playing in this state provides an average FPS of 68.8, a min FPS of 52.5, and a max FPS of 84.6. So isn't that strange? In my 4K test, this machine has beat all the previous high-end Macs that were capable of doing 4K in terms of frame rate, but it lost in the 1080p high test when going back to my M1 Max performance-wise. So yeah, I mean, overall, this device is still killing it. I just thought it was strange that the first test was worse than a lot of other machines. I don't know. So yeah, look, I'm pretty happy with this port. It gets the job done, you know, reasonably well, pretty well on each Mac that it's supported for, which is basically Apple Silicon. It's also evident to me now that Feral Interactive are probably done with Intel-based Macs, and I'm okay with that, I guess. I'm also curious to see if, I'm in neutral, if Feral Interactive will port more racing games to Mac through code weavers. Because in the past, Feral Interactive had a great relationship with code weavers. Code weavers, codemasters. You know, porting Dirt 4, Dirt Rally, Grid Autosport, Dirt 3, Ford Racing 2. Anyone play that on PowerPC? I still play that game regularly. Awesome. So yeah, it's been a very long time since Feral have brought a racing game to Mac, whereas in the past they'd bring one, you know, regularly. So I'm hoping moving forward that we can expect more racing games from them. So it's really hard to speak to a camera as I'm playing a racing game. It's like two sides of my brain working, and I'm not doing very well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Good port, check it out if you're interested. It doesn't have multiplayer, that sucks. The Mac App Store exclusivity is kind of meh, but at the end of the day, I'm glad this game is here because how many other racing games do we have on Mac, you know? Oh wait, we do have that arcade racing game on Apple Arcade, Gear Cub Stradale. So this is kind of the best we got right now, and it's pretty good for what it is. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I don't know what my next video will be on, but it will be on something Apple related, obviously.